you can learn a lot about your audience, who they are, what they like, where they live, who they're fans of, and to an extent through research, how they like to receive their sports information.
Hey, y'all, you got here just in time for the Fishing Business Podcast. So glad you're here today. I've got a special guest for you to introduce you to a very old and actually very dear friend of mine, Gary Morgenstern. We worked together for a lot of years and have been through a lot of things together. Gary was the director of programming for ESPN when we had Outdoors on the network. So ESPN Outdoors, Gary kind of headed that up and decided what would be on the air and when. That's what a programming director's job is. They figure out, they use a lot of research, audience research and other things to figure out when people want to watch certain content. Now, Gary is the senior vice president of programming for the SportsNet New York, which is SNY. People refer to it as SNY, and it's the television network for the New York Mets. If you don't live in the New York area, you probably don't get it, but it's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week network all about programming about New York. Great job. Gary works in Rockefeller Center. Oh, now he works in the New World Trade Center towers. Great office, great job. But I thought you guys might want to hear what Gary had to say about how he makes decisions on what good content is. Because really, when you think about it, we all program our own network these days. Our social media and the content we put out is like programming our own personal television channel. So I thought it'd be great to talk to Gary today about how you make good decisions about what content you do and when. All right, y'all. Gary Morgenstern, SVP, SportsNet New York programming. Here we go, y'all. It'll be good. Gary Morgenstern, I'm so glad to get to talk to you today. We talk from time to time throughout the year, not nearly enough, in my opinion. We don't get to talk
Agreed.
enough, but you're working from home. It's still during the pandemic when we're recording this. Gary's in New York and still not going back to work yet.
Not yet. We have a timeline, but we're not quite there yet.
Well, okay, Gary, so a lot of my listeners and viewers, because this is on YouTube too, as I think you know, they may not be familiar with SNY. Can you kind of tell us what SportsNet New York is?
Sure. So SNY, we go by the name SNY, and we've been around now. This is our 16th year on the air, and people know us as SNY, which stands for SportsNet New York. We are a regional sports network. There are many across the country that cover the local teams. And here in New York, there are actually 4 regional sports networks. There's MSG Network, which carries the Rangers and Knicks and a few other teams. There's the Yes Network, which carries the Yankees and the Nets. There's MSG2, which carries the Islanders, Devils, and a few other teams. And then there's us, SNY, and we're really the home of the New York Mets baseball team, as well as the New York Jets, some other sports like University of Connecticut, which is in our territory. But it's really a way of saying we're a sports network that is regional in nature. And we carry the local teams and news programming, studio programming, that really focuses on the local New York teams. And that's where we have to make sure that we're meaningful to the New York sports audience.
Right. And I'm going to prove my Southern ignorance right here, but what are the Islanders?
Well, the Islanders are a hockey team in the NHL that they've been around now almost 50. They launched in 1972.
Wow.
They had a lot of success early on in the 80s. They won 4 Stanley Cups. Not as successful recently, but they're an NHL hockey team and maybe not so visible there in the South.
Right. But I know you're a big hockey fan and you're also a big baseball fan. You grew up as a Mets fan, right?
I did. You kind of end up being a fan that your father was. My father grew up a Dodgers fan when the Brooklyn Dodgers were still in New York. And then they left for California. And a few years later, the New York Mets were launched as a National League replacement. My dad was a Mets fan, hence I was a Mets fan, and landed at SNY, where we are the home of the New York Mets. Pretty cool.
Well, it's funny because a lot of people would think that working at ESPN was a dream job, but now at SNY, it's really a dream job for you, isn't it?
It's true. For a guy who grew up loving TV and sports as his two favorite things in life, getting a job at ESPN, kind of the pinnacle, as you know, the pinnacle of sports television, was truly a dream. And they created the whole genre of 24/7 sports. Nobody thought anyone wanted to watch sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But ESPN proved everyone wrong. And you're right. When SNY came along and launched as a regional sports network for the Mets, no better dream job for me personally.
Okay, I'm gonna go off script here for a minute, Gary, and say something that I don't know. Probably nobody knows this about you. A lot of people don't know, but it's in Wikipedia, so I know it's true. Is that you were very instrumental in developing the virtual first down line, right?
Your
name is in Wikipedia on the when you.
Okay, I admit it.
So how did that happen?
So it's an interesting story. I'll tell it real quickly. My brother and I used to have season tickets for the New York Jets. And our seats, we were young, didn't have a lot of money to spend on season tickets. Our season tickets were all the way up at the top of Old Giant Stadium at the Meadowlands. And our seats were on the 30-yard line. So when you tried to get a view of the first down marker, it was really hard to see where that first down marker was and whether the player or the quarterback who was trying to achieve a first down reached the first down marker distance. And I thought about, can they shoot some sort of, radar or like something across the field to show the line on the field at the stadium
on the
grass. At the same, like something that clear to the people in the stadium. But at the same time, the whole virtual imaging technology was coming around. And ESPN, where I was working at the time, the head of the programming department, you may remember John Wildak.
Oh my gosh.
Out to the company, if we have virtual imaging, what could we do with it aside from selling advertising? And I thought of, can they do something with the line on the TV screen if they can't do it in the stadium? And, I take some level of credit, Angie, for coming up with that idea. But the real genius is the execution.
I was going to say.
Putting that line on the screen and making it as realistic as they have.
It's
like if you watch it, and I know you have, a player could step on the line.
Right.
Or, it's just great technology.
Yeah.
I would say a good idea, but great execution.
Yeah. I'll go along with you on that. The execution is what makes that. And now we can't, we expect, like I go to a normal football game and expect to see the yellow line down there where
I can tell you it wasn't that long ago that we realized at SNY, we don't have a choice.
Yeah.
You can't produce football anymore at the college level, at the pro level, I'm guessing at the high school level, without a first down line anymore.
That's right.
The fans expect it.
All because of Gary Morgenstern's idea. I'm so proud of you about that. But listen, when you started at ESPN, I think I'm remembering this right. You started in research, right?
I did.
And what kind of role? What was that?
So when I came out of college, way back when, I can date myself, but it was the mid 80s. Broadcasting and TV were one of those fields that was very difficult to break into. I knew what I wanted to do down the line, I wanted to be in programming because I can go into it, but I won't bore you or everyone listening. That it was I viewed it as a stepping stone research. And I really thought that if you know about the broadcasting industry, the fundamental piece of that industry is really research.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important to know what people want to see, what they watch. And we're really fortunate in this business that you can put a show on one day, and the very next day you get information from the Nielsen company saying what people watched and what they didn't watch,
right,
what they liked and what they didn't like. And that information that you get is broken down into demographics. So you know people of this age like this show, or people of this income category don't like this show. And it's really beneficial and helpful as you try to determine what's working and what's not working. We're like, name a business that you get that kind of immediate feedback with.
Right.
It's not common,
right,
but in our business it is, and it's really valuable. And it really helps you as a programmer determine what people want. Remember, it's not about what you want,
right,
as a programmer. You know, when you think about a disc jockey on the radio, they play the songs that they like, but they should really be playing the songs that their audience likes.
right.
And in TV, we can do that. We know what people respond to and what they don't respond to. And I think if you're a good programmer, you react accordingly.
Yeah.
And I saw that. I was a young kid when I came out of college, and I couldn't get the programming job I wanted, and immediately. There are stepping stones to getting there, but I really thought research was the right stepping stone.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for a few years in the entertainment industry before I got the job at ESPN. But at ESPN, I worked in programming research, and I think it really was a great fundamental area to start in that set me up for the rest of my career.
So I'm writing that down because I try to do some takeaways at the end of the conversation about the key things and key points. And I think that's a key takeaway for anybody listening, because you may not have a TV show on Nielsen, but if you have social media and your account is a business account, and it should be, you can go back and look at your own analytics and tell isn't it wondrous, Gary, that an individual can do that now? We can look and see who liked it and how many people liked it. And it stays there for a long time. It's not just one day and it's gone.
And as you know, Angie, in the digital world, you even get more data and information. It's almost difficult to cut through it all because there are so many different pieces of information, and it's hard figuring out what's the most meaningful piece.
It really is.
Page views and time spent, there's so many categories, and you really have to decipher what is most meaningful to you in the little piece of the industry you're operating within.
Right. And, the other thing, Gary, is you have to look at trends, I think. You can't just put content out and then look at it the next day and say, oh, that didn't work, or it did work. You have to look at trends and how it relates to everything else you do. Don't you agree? Do you do that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's over. You have to look at it over time.
Mm-hmm.
And then you really have to look at all the different things you're doing. And you're doing a lot of different things all the time. You really have to make certain assumptions. It's difficult at times, but you really try to get a grasp on the whole. And that's really the difficulty, is trying to make sense out of all the disparate pieces of info that you're collecting.
So one of the things I call it social media strategy, and it's in my marketing business. That's one thing I do for clients. I help them with their strategy. And I think one of the things that makes it easier to analyze is when you kind of when you said you're doing a lot of things, if you can kind of stick to a couple of things,
right,
you can start learning and seeing what the trends are without being kind of all over the place.
Agreed.
It's probably the same on a TV network.
It is. it's a little different in that we don't really have the opportunity to do as many things as can happen in social media on digital platforms.
Right.
Working with our digital folks at SNY, they have more ideas than they can possibly do.
Right.
On the TV side, because of the expense and the effort, manpower, we really have to limit the new original concepts and objectives. We just know we can't do it all. So we're way more selective, I believe.
Yeah.
Which has benefits and some negatives.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. When we worked together on ESPN Outdoors, there were, again, back then there were lots of things we wanted to try. And, the timeline too was different. You couldn't just do something and throw it up and see how it worked. It took a lot of
pre-production. I agree, but I think for our group, Angie, when we worked on ESPN Outdoors, I chalk it up to two things. In a way, I think of digital and social platforms today as sort of an extension of what we were doing in cable, right?
Absolutely.
Because in broadcast TV, things were even more expensive and more challenging, and there was less time on the schedule to try things. But in the world we operated in, Angie, we did a lot of original creative things.
We sure did.
I can remember sitting around with you guys at JM Associates and really challenging ourselves to come up with new ideas. And let's try this and let's try that. We had the time to do it.
Right.
We had our block of time
that
we could do pretty much whatever we wanted within that block of time. And somehow, I'm not quite sure how, but the manpower and the budgets allowed us to do those things. And it was a really creative and fun time.
It really was.
Really let your mind go. And without getting too far ahead of myself, I think that the genre, the fishing and outdoors and hunting genre really lent itself to trying great new things. And
absolutely,
we kind of did it all.
Yeah, we did. Now, okay, so this is a great segue because, even though Gary is an incredible sports fan, he did end up in programming at ESPN, and he ended up being the head of programming for the outdoor category on ESPN. So we had a 4-hour block of outdoor shows on Saturday morning when ESPN2 launched. We started a 4-hour block of shows on Sunday morning. At one point, we had a weekday strip of programming, an hour every weekday afternoon. And Gary was over all of that, trying to figure out. Now, I'll tell you, in some ways, Gary, we were a little bit below the radar, I think, and that allowed us to do a lot of really creative things.
Yes, we were early on. As you know, Angie, that changed as we grew and got into primetime outdoors, and great outdoor games, and Bassmaster content. But early on, we were very much under the radar. And I think the beauty of that and the benefit was, like I said, we would sit around and I would really sit with you guys. Now, the beauty was that you guys lived and breathed the category every day. You lived in that category. You knew it better than, it wasn't an outsider looking in. You were inside.
Yeah.
And those meetings where we would sit around and brainstorm, the sky's the limit. We felt we could try anything, do anything, because you guys, the JM Associates folks, if it were me in Bristol, Connecticut, trying to figure out what outdoors people wanted to see, I would ask them. Yeah. And I would have to go to them and call on them. But you were them. And that was the beauty. Not only did you know it, you were creating the content.
Right.
And so presumably, and in reality, you were creating content that you wanted to see, knowing that it would be what everyone wanted to see.
100%.
And it was a really great way to approach it.
Yes.
And when you think about it, when when you think of all the disciplines and all the ways to approach all the disciplines within outdoors, just thinking about the Outdoor Store, that series that we ran, like that was really cool. You can't think about doing that in other sport genres, but it worked in that sport genre.
That's right.
And there are so many of those examples that, like, too many to mention, but we tried it all. We did it all. And if we didn't, you'd wonder, why didn't we?
Right.
Why didn't we think of that?
Right.
We did. We thought of everything.
So, and what Gary's referring to is our production company in Little Rock. We were a contractor basically to ESPN. We worked exclusively. That was our only client. We worked for ESPN, and we worked within the outdoor space. And we had great relationships with people like Gary and Julie Sobieski and Bill Fitz, who were all executives at the network. And they were very, very gracious about letting us be part of the decision-making process. And as Gary said, we understood what fishing and outdoor enthusiasts wanted to see, because we were the outdoor enthusiast, but also happened to be good at production and have pretty creative thoughts. I'll tell you one good example of what you just mentioned is creating something because we thought it would be what we would want to see. We produced this show called School by Denny Brower, and it was a show where a regular Joe would go out on the lake with Denny, and he would go fish this lake, and then Denny would basically critique him to say, here's what you did well, here's what you didn't do as well, here's how I would have done it. And it was basically a lesson. And the way that came about was we were like, as we traveled around producing programming, we realized people really would love to fish with these pro anglers, because the people that were watching wanted to get better at what they were doing. And so we were like, why don't we give that a shot and see? And that was a great show that went a long time.
It really was. And what you're pointing out, Angie, is another thing. Like, you were advisors to us at ESPN. We didn't necessarily know the significance of Denny Brower.
Right.
We knew his name, but you guys taught us, here's a guy that you want to work with because our audience really will respond to him. And having you guys as our advisors was invaluable.
Right.
Like, how could we possibly know as much as you guys know living in that community? And it really benefited us. So it wasn't just concepts of shows, which were really important for us to get an idea. This is what somebody wants to see.
Yeah.
But it were the people that we wanted to be with, and Denny was a perfect example.
Right.
I don't know if you remember, but TNN, the network TNN, had their own outdoors block.
Right.
And in a way, we competed with TNN.
Right.
We competed with them because we were scheduled at the same time. We competed with them for shows and hosts. And, it would be very easy to be focused only on, here's our block at ESPN, and here's their block at TNN, and just looking at it purely from a ratings point of view. But we didn't look at it that way. We looked at it more like, as ESPN wanted to be the source for the outdoors, between the block programming with the vignettes and the wraparounds and all of that, to the content. It was important for us to be more than just a programmer of outdoors. And I think you guys at JM Associates helped us become that. Like, we felt bigger and more meaningful as a source for outdoors content.
Well, and that kind of went back to the network's philosophy at the time, was they wanted to be the worldwide authority on sports, on all sports, including the outdoors. So we wanted to be the worldwide authority on the outdoors, right? That's
correct. And, in fact, at one point, I was trying to figure out the whole network within a network concept. I really felt that we owned, for lack of a better term, the outdoor space with what we were doing on a weekly basis. And you reminded me of the weekday block. But when you think about all the components at one point that ESPN Outdoors really encompassed, like, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of responsibility came with that. And I think we handled it really well there for a while.
We did. And, when we were doing that, what it reminds me of, well, okay, before I go on, let me say again, for the viewers at home that are listening to this or watching this, the takeaway I think for you is if you have a philosophy of what you want your brand to be, then you want to make sure you do the content that you push out is always in support of what you want your brand to be. So don't go off brand. Like you want to be the worldwide authority on Angie Thompson. I need to make sure all of my content supports what I want Angie Thompson to be. And anybody at home needs to think that way too. But I do say it's interesting, Gary, because, there's a term now that I hear a lot that the riches are in the niches. And,
yes.
And especially with programming, television programming, it seems like a lot of live sports is really what people and live anything is really the thing that people tune into TV for anymore. Everybody's time shifted. Everybody's watching it at another time or on another device. And so what we were doing back then was sort of like the riches are in the niches, is what people are doing on YouTube now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it goes back to what I said earlier. I think on the cable TV side, you have the luxury of time.
Yeah.
And that you take that to yet a different level with digital platforms, with YouTube and other digital platforms where you can go deep. You can go very deep. Think about it. When you think about broadcast TV that I grew up with,
mm-hmm.
when you have an hour for a talk show, you can only go so far.
Yeah, that's right.
And you basically touch the treetops.
Yeah.
And then you have to move on. But with cable TV, things went a little bit further. And today they go even further in terms of digging deeper. And when you think about what people want, they want to see your show, but they want a lot more too. They want details.
Yeah.
They want to comment on your show.
Right.
They want their comments to be heard. I'm thinking about just yesterday, you talk about me being a hockey fan. Well, there was a controversy in hockey with the New York Rangers and a very, how shall I say, there was an official's call that the Ranger fans didn't agree with and the Ranger team didn't agree with. And what it led to was a very physical game between the Rangers and the Capitals last night with a lot of fights. And I watched that game, but felt that I had something to say about it. And I wanted to say something, and I wanted to see what other people were saying about it. Well, digital platforms allow you to do that today.
That's right.
And I did say what I wanted to say. But when you think about it, and only think about what we would have done, ESPN and JM Associates, if we were televising that game, well, there were a lot of secondary and tertiary stories going on that you want to cover.
Right.
And you feel you need to cover, and we would have been able to cover and go deeper. And does it appeal to everybody out there? I don't think so. But to your point, there is a niche somewhere where somebody wants that story and wants to know more about it, and they want to weigh in and talk about it and go deeper. And we were doing that way back when. You're right. We were doing that because we used to brainstorm ways to go deeper.
Right.
What if somebody wants to see this or that? And you're right. In today's world, I get lots of questions about whether I think digital platforms are killing linear TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think so. Same way that cable TV didn't kill broadcast TV. We're just watching more.
Yeah.
We're watching what we want to watch.
That's right.
Maybe you just want to peek in and watch the game. Well, you can do that. Maybe you want to go a little deeper and know some backstories. Well, you can do that. And maybe you want to interact, whether that's in the form of sports gambling or fantasy sport. Like you can do it all and there's something for everybody now.
Right.
But you got to decide, what do you want? What do you want out of it?
That's right.
But I don't believe anything is killing anything else. I think they all exist in parallel next to one another. You just figure out which area you're most interested in. And maybe it's several.
Right. Agreed. 100%. I agree. So how would you advise someone if someone was thinking about their channels, their social media, their Snapchat, their Facebook, their YouTube, and they're programming it like a television network? What would you say are the smart programming decisions to ask yourself before you push content out?
I feel like you just set me up for this question, Andy, because I really believe it's a couple of things we talked about. It's really important to remember that you're programming for an audience. You're not programming for yourself. You're programming for an audience. So knowing what people are interested in and what they want to consume, whether it's in a content form or an interactive form, it's really important to understand what the audience wants. I'll give you an example. When I worked at ESPN, remember, ESPN is a national network. And when you think about the audience at ESPN, it's national in scope. When I work at SN, I had to rethink my programming approach completely, because we're not programming to a national audience. We're programming to this regional audience. New York sports fans. New York sports fans is a subset of the national audience, but it's very, very specific.
Right.
And I had to reteach myself how to program to that New York audience. And it was very important to know my audience is now this group of fans who expects this group of sports delivered in this very specific way.
Right.
It's not a national, they care about Tiger Woods and Kobe Bryant and whomever. Whereas New York sports fans care about the Mets and Yankees and Islanders, and Rangers and the Jets it's very specific. So I would say make sure as a programmer, you know who your audience is. And through research, as we talked about earlier, you can learn a lot about your audience, who they are, what they like, where they live, who they're fans of, and to an extent through research, how they like to receive their sports information.
Right.
Whether it's studio programming or game content, you can learn a lot about your audience. And I think that's really important.
Agreed.
Make sure you know who they are, how they like to consume sports, in this case, sports. But you can take the time and really learn that. And I think it's really important. Again, you can program to yourself, but that's not what the goal really should be. It's programming to your audience and knowing through research and experience what they really want to see.
Awesome. That's great advice, Gary. I'm going to take a real quick break here, but when we come back, I'm going to ask you, what do you see in baseball, in content about baseball, on any platform that people in the fishing world could leverage? So you guys stay with us. We're going to be right back on the Fishing Business Podcast with Gary Morgenstern from SportsNet New York. I really want to hear from you to know what kind of questions you have and how I can serve you best in this podcast. The easiest place to reach me is probably at Facebook or Instagram, where you can find me as Fishing Business Podcast, or on YouTube, but you'll have to search for me there by typing in Fishing Business Podcast. Holla! All right, we're back on the Fishing Business Podcast with Gary Morgenstern. Gary, I asked you this right before we went to break, but what do you see developing or trending in content in the baseball or sports world or New York sports world on any platform that people in the fishing world could leverage?
Yeah, to me, it's pretty clear. The interactive nature of whatever you call it, content distribution, broadcasting, game coverage, that interactive nature is so important today. Whereas it used to be a very passive thing, right? I haven't heard the term couch potato in a long time, but that's what we used to be. We used to sit on the couch and watch.
Right.
And today it's anything but that. When you think about younger audiences who really want to interact with the broadcast, it's not just sitting there listening to a play-by-play guy and a color commentator. It's all of those things. It's watching and playing along. It's watching and doing fantasy sports.
Yes.
It's watching and sports betting is such a big part of sports today. There's such an interactive element to it that it's growing. When I think about baseball, about baseball, the big concern with baseball audiences is an aging fan base. That if you look at the demographics for baseball, it's an older audience.
Yeah.
And the sport really spends a lot of time strategizing how to get the audience younger.
Yeah.
Because, if you follow this trend, one day there will be no more baseball fans, and that's not an option. And when you think about younger audiences sitting and watching passively, it's not what they do. And so a lot of time is spent trying to figure out how to make baseball more interactive. And, all it takes, the other day, I was in a place where I couldn't watch a Met game. I try to watch all Met games. So I watched the MLB interactive pitch by pitch
on your phone.
And it was really cool.
Yeah.
Like I watched it out of necessity because I didn't have an option to watch it live, but it was really cool. And I can see why audiences like that. When you think of the outdoors category, the sky's the limit, Angie, as you know. Like to such a large extent, there is no playbook. There are no guidelines. Fishing more than anything is participatory. Hunting more than anything is participatory. So ways to involve interactive elements.
Yeah.
Like, I guess it just depends how creative. I know we're very creative.
You know what? The simplest thing, though, is just to interact, to comment back, to talk to people, to get in their DMs, answer messages, answer comments. There are
so many components that need that. Whether it's what lore are you like?
Yes.
People want to know, what are you doing? Because I do that.
Right.
You can't say that for Major League Baseball.
No.
What kind of bat are you using?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
But like, what kind of lure? What kind of rod? Like, where are you going? What are you doing? What time of day? All of those important components are things that you can interact with. Right. And that should be front and center. Right. Like, what are you doing? I want to do that. And in the outdoors category, it lends itself to that more than anything.
Agreed. Okay, Gary, what's your favorite part of your job right now?
Well, I identified programming as an area that I wanted to get into very early on. I can tell you the story, but you don't want to hear it. Back in college, when I said I want to be a programmer, and I can remember the day that I decided I wanted to do that. And there were various reasons why I gravitated toward programming. But as I got into this field, the thing I enjoy more than anything is negotiating deals. And what I love to do, because in order to program a network, you need content to put on. I will tell you, as a programmer, we all know there are 8,760 hours in a year. And all of those hours must be programmed. You can't go to black.
Yeah.
You can't go to bars
the
and
Indian
tones.
head.
You need content.
Yeah.
And in order to have that content, you negotiate to acquire that content. And I love that process. I love working with people and working out an agreement. And more than anything, Angie, I love mutually beneficial deals. I learned very early on, if you do a deal that is just too good for ESPN or SNY, wherever I'm working, those deals don't tend to last.
Right.
Mutually beneficial deals tend to last. And I love the art of negotiating that deal and securing that deal and shaking hands and saying, this was a really good deal. That's what I love to do.
Well, and you used the word art there, and it was an art when I worked with you and you did it, because it's funny for me to hear you say that. I never knew that all these years later, but I never felt like we were negotiating. I always just felt like we were having a conversation and we were working out what would work for us and what would work for you. And it was always pleasant, and it was never something I dreaded, and you always came away feeling like, oh, that's going to be really good. So kudos
to you. That's nice of you to say, Angie. Thank you. One thing I must say, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, not every deal was a big moneymaker for JM Associates,
no, that's
as
right.
you know.
Right.
And you guys had the foresight and the wherewithal to say, we're not going to make money on this deal, but we're going to do it for the long-term benefit of our partnership.
Right.
And you did that at times, and I would like to believe that they paid off in the long run.
Yeah.
But you guys were special that way, in that you didn't look to make a killing on every deal. Some of them were an investment.
That's right. And a matter of fact, I just did that this morning, Gary. I just said yes to something that doesn't make financial sense, but I think it's the right thing to do because it'll help me in the long run. So still doing that.
It's important.
Learned that from the best at doing that. Jerry McInnes, he was the best at doing that. All right. So, Gary, I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for the time you spent with us today. I know you've got a lot of things to do that are probably way, way, way more important than this, but I appreciate you doing it. And I'm just grateful for your friendship over the years, because you have, in addition to being a business colleague, you've been a very important friend to me. And we, Jerry and I were very close to you and your family. I'll never forget how important your friendship has been to my whole career.
Angie, I echo all of that. I really enjoyed this today. As I mentioned, I really feel like I'm at the point of my career where I love giving back, whether it's the kids in college that I work with at my alma mater. I'm also talking to graduate students a few times a year at Fordham in the media and broadcasting area. I remember vividly how it felt to graduate and look for a career.
Yeah.
I know on paper it's many, many years ago, but in my world, I remember it like it was yesterday. And I want to give back. I want to share the experiences I've had. And as it pertains to you and JM Associates and Jerry, I feel the exact same way. We were an amazing team together, I believe. And all that we accomplished, the way we accomplished it, I feel never a more exciting time of my life than when we built ESPN Outdoors, and the way we did it together, and your involvement, just so meaningful in my life.
Thank you again, Gary. And thanks you guys for listening to the Fishing Business Podcast. I'm going to sign off now the way my favorite fisherman always signed off his show, The Fishing Hole, by saying, this is dedicated to Dad, because he always had time to take me fishing. See you next time, y'all.